Hey folks, week 5 still. Dr. Gelli's here, still in Linz, Austria, and today we're going to talk about measurement concepts. In other words, how do we measure and how do we determine the quality of the measure of the variables that we're going to be looking at? Notice that our friend here, again, he's blowing bubbles and thinking about the various ways he can measure things. Is he going to measure them in terms of slow versus fast, or is he going to count the number of males versus females? We're going to be looking at the x squared, and what about the sum? And how do you add all these particular things up? So this particular scientist has many things on his mind. So the two major things we're going to be talking about are reliability, which is the measure of behavior and describing the difference between test, retest, internal consistency, and interrater reliability. And then we'll also look at validity, and we'll talk about construct validity, predictive validity, concurrent validity, convergent validity, and discriminant validity. We'll also talk about the problem of reactivity of a measure of behavior and how do we minimize that reactivity. And we'll talk about very briefly, but again, the different levels of scales of measurement. We've already talked about that quite a bit, so might not get to that today. So reliability, again, that's a measure of the consistency or the stability of a measure of behavior. We'll talk about the true score versus the measurement error and how we can relate that to, again, what we just talked about in our other lecture on the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. What does that mean? You have a reliability measure, and how can we use the correlation coefficient to help us improve or at least assess the reliability of a particular measure? And again, when we're talking about a measure, we're talking about like an instrument that you might develop, such as a survey or an observation sheet or any other ways of taking a look at those particular elements. As you remember, the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient can go from either -1 to +1. 0 to +1, again, the variables are going to covary in the same way, and if it's 0 to -1, they vary in opposite directions. As one goes up, the other one goes down. A couple of different ways we can measure the reliability of a test. One is test-retest reliability. Again, this is measured by the same individual at 2 points in time, such as if I give somebody a test of how fast they can run, and I measure it both at the same track but on different days, maybe a month apart, and I want to see if they are consistently running the same speed. That's test-retest reliability. It is vulnerable to artificiality. Artificiality meaning, well, if I'm testing somebody and they know that they're supposed to be doing better on the second time, they may put a little bit more effort forth into it. And again, it's also vulnerable to maturation. If the time frame between when you measure that time, the first run, and you wait 25 or 30 years, and then you measure it again, well, the participant in your measurement is probably going to be a little bit older and maybe quite a bit slower. So you have to be aware of that. Internal consistency reliability has these three different types of measurements. One is a split half reliability. In this case, what we would do is take a look at the first half of a measure and the second half of a measure. Again, if I was using a test to give you guys and I had 100 items, I would measure the first 50% of the questions and compare that with the second 50% of the questions that you answered to see if there's a difference in the level of difficulty in that particular test. We also have a Cronbach's alpha. The Cronbach's alpha is a rather complex way of measuring reliability, but basically it measures each item in a test, such as each question, against all of the other questions to see what is the reliability there. It takes a bit of time, but again, is another measure of reliability in the case you see somebody mention a Cronbach's alpha. And then the item total correlations, taking a look at all of the items and taking a look at the scores on all the items, how often they were missed, how often they were identified as correct, or the observations that you make for your survey results, and take a look at how they correlate with each other. The interrater reliability is the correlation between the observations of different raters. For instance, if you were going to rate your professor, and everybody had a similar score of 3.2, then we have a high level of interrater reliability. However, if we have some individuals that rated out of 2 and several others are rated out of 5, then you can see that our reliability is going to be a bit questionable. What's going on there? Why are some individuals rating very high and some individuals rating very low? Now, reliability indexes don't indicate whether a specific measure is an accurate measure of the variable of interest. It can be highly reliable, but not accurate. Let's get back to our, if you remember in one of our first classes, I was talking about if I wanted to hire somebody as a cook. And I was able to identify and pick 10 people that I wanted to have and come interview and conduct a test whether they were going to be my cook or not. So as they were gathering, I said, okay, we're going to go outside and we're going to have you all mow the grass. I'm going to evaluate how accurate and how speedy you can mow the grass. Well, they might all have a very, very similar time and quality level, but that really doesn't measure whether or not they're going to be a good cook or not. So we've got to make sure that the test that we have is not only reliable, but it actually measures what it's supposed to measure. You can see here if we had that test and I measured the time and I had everybody mowing the grass and it went all the way from 85 minutes to 115 minutes, then that's not a very reliable measure because the times are so spread out. But if everybody was right there within 95 to 105 minutes, then we're going to have a much higher reliable measure and a much higher reliable aspect of that. But again, it does not mean that that's going to be a good indicator of whether somebody can cook or not. Validity, of course, though, does measure whether a metric or a measurement or a survey actually measures what it's supposed to measure. If I wanted to find out how much you like this class, and I gave you a test on English, well, that's not going to give me, I could get a very high reliable score, but it's not going to really tell me whether you like my class or not. So that's what we're going to be talking about now. So the first one we're going to talk about is construct validity, and that's made up of face validity and content validity. Now, face validity is just, what does it look like? Does it look like it's actually going to measure what it's supposed to measure? And content validity means how well does it actually predict in the future how somebody's going to behave on this particular one? Is it measuring the same thing at the same time across people? Is it enough of a measure that people answer the questions very similarly, but also is there enough variability in people's responses so that not everybody says on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. There has to be a little bit of discrimination there, otherwise there's probably a problem with that particular question. Again, here's the measurements here. The face validity, does it appear to reflect the construct being measured? The content validity, is it linked to the universe of the content that defines the construct, such as mowing the grass versus cooking? Not very content valid there. Predictive, would it actually predict? Would mowing the grass actually predict how good of a cook you would be? Again, from a concurrent validity perspective, are they related to a specific criterion measured at the same time? I would measure your outputs on cooking compared with another bunch of people on cooking and see if there's actually a relationship there. Are the scores on the measure related to other measures of the same construct? Can I give you a test on a different type of a test for cooking, and maybe how fast you can boil water? Is that related to other elements, such as making bread or something like that? And are the scores not related to other measures that are theoretically different? Is the cooking test different enough, discriminant enough from the lawn mowing test? When we think about conducting research on personality and individual differences, we have to be aware that people are different. And we do systematic and detailed research on validity, and it's most often carried out on measures of personality and differences in people, such as ability to think, cognition, those kind of things. When you think about it, should use measures of personality have demonstrable validity and reliability. And you can find this kind of information out in the Mental Measurement Yearbook. So if you're looking for a survey and an instrument to use for your specific research question, take a look at the Mental Measurement Yearbook. And it is in the Laverne Library. You can access it there. And if you get stuck, of course, contact a Laverne librarian. They are always happy to help. Reactivity of measures is how much do people respond to it? In other words, A, are people being aware that it's a survey, and are they going to respond differently? And B, does the question generate any kind of additional concern or change in the actual way they would behave? So you've got to watch out for that, and you've got to be able to measure that behavior in terms of your potential reactivity. And you would do that again by collecting many, many different types of responses, and then seeing how much the variability on a specific item in your survey changes. For instance, if you were asking about your experiences in a car accident, that would cause a reaction among those people who have been in a car accident, particularly if it was a death or serious injury. Whereas if it was a minor fender bender, the reactivity would not be there. You have to be cautious of that. we already talked about the different variables and the measurement scales, the nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, and it's important to make sure you use the specific test for those particular elements there. So you got to make sure that you use those. Here again is the different scales, and you can see for nominal we have examples of males and females, introverts versus extroverts, just the name, right? No numerical value to it. Ordinal is when we start putting things in order, ranking popular TV shows, those kind of things. Interval, of course, is an artificial set of scales, such as an intelligence scale, aptitude test scores, temperature. When we think about that, when we think about measuring temperature, and we say, well, it's 0 degrees in Minnesota today, does that mean there's an absence of temperature? No, not really. It's simply an arbitrary mark on a scale that will indicate what the temperature is. And finally, ratio level. This is, again, the highest level of measurement. Highly recommend that you get as many of these types of data points in your research as possible, because you can run so many more statistical tools on it. And you can convert ratio level data into the other types of data that we see here. You can take interval ratio data and move it to interval, move it to ordinal, or move it to nominal. But you can't go the other way around. You can't take nominal data and move it to ordinal, interval, or ratio. So collect as much ratio level data as you can. So remember, psychometric properties of both validity and reliability are related to the quality of a research study, including yours. Reliability measures the quality of the instrument related to multiple reviews of the instrument, internally and externally. And validity measures the quality of the instrument in relation to, does it study what it says it's supposed to study. So you'll see these particular elements when you look up references in research studies, and you'll have to evaluate how valuable is that research study based on the psychometric properties. You'll hear that term used often. All right, again, drop me an email if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon.